Hi there. I'm recording this video as a summation and sort of just a capsule review of this game. I've come to the end. It's actually only the just coming up to the night turn on the second day, so we potentially have 2 more days. But the Allied army has called it. You can see we have Leipzig here, and over here the French are squashing the Allies right down up against the river here. There is a ford here which could bring them down through here and then into this region, but through doing that it means that the Allies never have a chance to capture the main supply route of the French up there, and they would need that to win the game, or to dislodge that headquarters. And because of there is a route through here, through the Lindenau Bridge here has been blown, so there's potentially a route through here, but it's swampy ground, very difficult to fight through, and then they would have to attack across a bridge there into Leipzig itself. And if you have massed artillery on the defence, you're just never going to do it. And conversely, to say cross into terrain like this, or if you wanted to cross that bridge there, you would have to mass artillery yourself to do that. So essentially what you would probably get is, on say if the Austrians were here with massed artillery, they would succeed in an attack. They would get 1 unit over into there, maybe 2 or 3 if they've got a cavalry squadron and a some skirmishers, what do you call them, the battalion units, so weak ones, and then on the next turn they would be knocked back by a massed battery there, so you would just get an ineffective dueling match, and which is essentially what has been happening here, which means that the mass of Austrians that were hoping to charge across and into Leipzig there have given up, and that they've been moving around here to come up and assist with the defence here, because the French are having quite success here. Slow, but it's taken them all day to push the Allies there. We've got all the nations represented there. In fact, it's taken the whole day to push them back about 3 or 4 hexes, but they could probably take that unaided at the moment, so these fellows are coming to protect that headquarters there. At the beginning of the next turn we're going to get some reinforcements coming on here, so it's a fairly sizable force, two formations, and so they will be able to come around here. So there are some units coming out to meet that, but you can see that the bulk of the French are still over here finishing off the fighting there, so the French will probably be able to hold off an incursion from there for a while, in time for this, or at least most, is to get finished off before they can, and then give them time to shift forces back. So essentially the Allies see that they don't have a chance. Essentially they have to take Leipzig and or this, and then they're not going to be able to do it. The main effect of this, apart from squashing the Allies down, is that it meant Bernadotte and his reinforcement force could never come on, because they could either have come on at the top there, but that was stopped. Then they could have come on here or here, but this one was captured, and now this one has been captured too. There's no way for them to come on according to the rules. So I think the sense is that the French control too much area around here, and the army just can't sort of force its way up here, and there's just not enough time to move over the whole army that's coming in, to move over these 2 rivers and have an effect upon the general battle. So without those reinforcements, the Allies have just called it off. Effectively they're going to withdraw through the rivers here and withdraw here, and this means that the French can't claim a win because they did not destroy all the active. Well, hang on a minute. Yes, according to it says no active headquarters. In a turn or two, there will be no active headquarters, Allied headquarters on the map. So yes, the French will claim a win. That is their victory condition. So it was a good game. I really enjoyed it. And it is like a mini monster because there's a lot of pieces on the map, and it's the rule system is sort of quite full of options to do. So although everything happens really quickly, it's not onerous and figuring out combat tables and so forth. There's just lots going on. So in summation about the system, I think that essentially the system I think is excellent, but this game itself, Leipzig, is flawed for a reason which has been pointed out before, and even with my fixes, I couldn't really sort of fudge it enough. The problem is that the French can block the entry hexes for the Allied armies coming in far too easily, and even if you say, as I did, that at the beginning they weren't allowed to block the entry hexes, so to give the Allies a chance at least to come on, they still could stand close enough. You can see here, because there's nothing coming on there at the beginning, and the French start with the bulk of their force there, I immediately shifted that main part here to counteract this. So I could have stopped these coming on at all. I let them come on, as kind of like a house rule, as others have suggested, just so that the Allies can get on. But then there was such a bulk and so strong forces, because you have 6 strength, old guard and young guard against 2 or 3 strength Prussian or Russian infantry units. It's not a decent match. So it was such a strong force, inevitably that they were going to push them back. These fellows had to try and keep these 2 open, and the French 6 hexes away, so they had to keep the French back here. There was just no chance they could, or else Bernadotte could never come on, and that is what happens. And Bernadotte could sort of swing it to the favour of the Allies. It just couldn't happen. And similarly, the French, they had enough force, and I don't see how I could really have done it different with the Allies. I could have, I could have not sent a force up here, but this way they did capture one of their objectives. If I'd sort of forfeited that, left that to the French, and concentrated on just getting to the headquarters, then I could have had a much stronger force here, and I think that would then have been more of an even fight, so there would have been a tremendous battle going on here. And then perhaps when those fellows came on, if I house rule it that the French couldn't block it, because as they are, they could just block those entry hexes, and the rules as written, they would never come on. But anyway, if that came on, then yes, then there might be a preponderance of enough Allied forces to start coming this way, which would cause some of these to come back, and then maybe Bernadotte eventually could come on. But I tend to think that would still be too late. So what I'm essentially saying is I think this scenario as written is unbalanced in favour of the French. All you need to do is shift the bulk of your forces to one side. For example, if I shifted them all down there, we would have completely decimated those. That headquarters would have been gone, and then we could have moved them all over there. And that sort of ties into things I like about the system, and that's one of the things is this march movement. If there's at least 3 hexes between units, so that your zone of control is not in their zone of control, and zone of controls are not blocked by enemy zone of controls, not blocked by friendly units in this. But essentially, if you have at least that distance, units can move a march distance, so that's 9 hexes for infantry and artillery, and 15 for cavalry, and then the half movement point cost on roads. So you can see cavalry could move 30 hexes on roads, and infantry and artillery 18. So what that means is you can shift, as long as you have reserves, out of the front line, you can shift them from one side of the battlefield to another very quickly, and so that makes for exciting manoeuvres and exciting manoeuvres and overall strategy. So I really like that. That I like all the sort of extra wrinkles put into this game, such as the sticky zones of control. So once you're in a zone of control, you cannot move out of it unless you have a higher movement rate or another unit, you leave a unit behind in that hex, and even then you roll for your movement, so you might only move one hex, or you might get your 3 or 4. So I really like that. You have sticky zones of control, but then you have a wrinkle that enables some movement in it. And so what that consequently means is that quite often you're using cavalry forces to screen units. So for example here, that's a cavalry force, although it's spent at the moment ineffective. If this is the Russian player turn, he can move the units out there from underneath there and leave the cavalry one there. So you find the cavalry performing their screening role, as well as they can also charge. Normally you can only attack a stack once each turn, but if, say, as the French, so you disrupted a stack there, and then you had a cavalry unit, the cavalry unit can then attempt to charge, and then the defender can attempt counter charges. So so things like that in the combat, and then the different combat tables. So you can have you can choose to try to disengage or to skirmish instead. It all makes the actual tactics very interesting, and I explained a bit about those in some other videos, so I won't go into it now. But so essentially I've been really happy to play some other games in this series, the Musket and Sabre series, but I'm going to be careful and sort of read up on the games first, see if I can find out whether people think they are balanced or not, or if there's some problems with the actual specific battle. I think the rules set is solid, but I think it's the trouble with it's a problem that war game producers have, for example, like Decision Games, is that they have to keep bringing out games in a rapid succession, because nowadays you don't get massive. You don't do massive print runs. So if you spend, say, 3 months, let's say, just for the sake of it, designing a game, it's going to have say maybe a 5 or 8 week apparently kind of life, and after that it's going to die, because there's so many other companies, so many other games, and the market's just not big enough. So one game's generally just going to sell a few thousand units, and then that's it. So they don't actually warrant spending years developing and playtesting and checking everything on. So the sense I get from this game, I suspect for all the rest of the system, is that the design itself is solid because it's been tried on lots of games, and the designers basically sort of got a good handle on lots of war game design, having lots of background experience in a sort of not too fancy design like this. It's got a solid chassis, and the extra bits that have been added to all that chrome I think well integrated and work really well. But then the problem comes in the specific battle designs. So how do you handle the fact that the French can shift forces so quickly, and yet and block the Allied entries, and yet the Allied the nature of this battle is that it's kind of like a meeting engagement. The Allied armies have to converge from separate directions, and you cannot have an infinite map to play it on. So there needed to be some more careful rules on how the Allies got onto the playing surface. And I suspect what happened is the playtest, as I think often happens with these sort of rapid production games, not for companies like Legion War Games and that take a long time. and I'm not hitting decision games at all in this. It's just their model makes it this way. It's got pros and cons. I think the pro, and it's a bit of a problem, is that as as consumers, we rapidly will lap up all the newest thing. So we have sort of no self control, and owing to that, the producers in some sense have to keep feeding us, and because they have to keep feeding us, they're giving us substandard products. On the whole, in the sense that they can't take the time to properly develop and playtest everything that they bring out. But as sort of fans, we can do our house rules and do that essential sort of playtesting ourselves after the fact. And I'm wondering how to solve it in this, because you're going to have to create some awkward rules, sort of disallowing. Essentially, I think you'll just have to do zones. So you'd say, no French within 6 or 8 or 10 hexes of entry hexes, and that means then that. But then that means the French never have a chance to keep Bernadotte off, which in the original rules they obviously do. I mean, the rules allow for him to come back here, but if the French, you do want some sense of the French being strong enough at some point, and maybe risking a lot elsewhere to keep Bernadotte off by capturing all his entry hexes. So how do you balance that? It's a difficult thing, and I'm not sure. I think you could do something like you could say if you capture an entry hex, then you have to feed units off the map that will never come back to keep it, and then you sort of use that against a roll to decide whether the enemy units come on or not. Do it something like that. So you have to consider, the amount of units that the French would have to have tied up to keep that particular sized Allied force at bay. So I think there has to be more of a cost to the French in something like that, in keeping the Allied units off the map. And on the other hand, you kind of want the Allied units all to come on, because that is what the battle was about. And I kind of a little bit disappointed in my playthrough this one that I didn't get to see, the real desperate defence of the French as they're hemmed in on all sides by the Allies. So that would have happened, say, if Bernadotte had come in on here. And again, I think it's a little difficult to see how that would happen with just the strength of the French are such a strength. And the slight of that bit of that problem is the fact that you get this kind of success breeds success problem with the game, and it's actually in the designer's notes. It's actually not in the game, but on the website, the expanded ones. He quotes it as being such a thing, in that you get fortunes of war on certain combat effects, or if you cannot attack when you should attack, and that's often when a unit or units are being surrounded. So say there's 3 units that they should attack in their turn, they can only attack 1, and so then the opponent will get 2 fortunes of war. And so this means that the opponent's winning, he gets more fortunes of war and he wins a bit more, and so the strong French kind of just got stronger and stronger, because part of the balance for the Allies is that in the Leipzig rules, there's a chance of French units defecting. So French units that were actually Saxons or something, I'm not sure which exactly, could defect over to the Allied side. They're actually just removed from the map. But that's only going to happen if the Allies are winning fogs of war, and if the French are sort of bearing down on them, they're just not getting those fogs of war, but the French are. So again, maybe I don't know. It'd be interesting to see how this game plays out with a lot of other players, which I suspect is going to be quite hard to distinguish. You know, the amount of games being out there as it is. I would give it, in my next play, I'd give that just as an automatic thing that the Allies can roll for that automatically without any fog of war, maybe once or twice. And I would also rule something that, for example, maybe for the entry axis being blocked, maybe you could have a rule whereby units can fight onto the board, although that could be very difficult. But then that means entry hex, because you know you might only get 1 or 2 units moving on, and if they're surrounded, it could get quite awkward. You could get a similar situation here, just units on the edge of the board just not getting anywhere. But then that would tie down the French, might allow more successes elsewhere. I don't know, I'm rambling, but you can see, I think you get the sense that I'm happy to have played this game at least to get some sense of what was going on, but unfortunately I think that this battle as is given is somewhat unbalanced. However, I think the system is a very good system, and I really look forward to trying it in another battle.